Thank you, Vice Provost Koshland. I've known Kathy Koshland for many, many years, and it's a delight to see her again. It's a delight to be back. I'm very happy to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to speak at the 8th Sustainability Summit. May there be many, many more. And to talk about water, perhaps the most precious resource on the planet. In particular, the growing tensions between the human right to water and what some people see as the business to water. Let me also offer my congratulations to all of the sustainability winners of the awards and to the new initiatives that were announced today. They're all a step in the right direction. Let me begin by observing, first of all, that working as a conservationist or an environmental advocate or an environmental scientist sometimes can be a little bit depressing. Every day, there's bad news. There's another battle lost or another step in the wrong direction or pushback and direct assaults from strongly vested economic and political interests. We see distressing ignorance in Congress and elsewhere about science and about environmental issues. Or worse than ignorance, sometimes we see outright disdain. We're sometimes worried that even our political allies aren't strong enough or aggressive enough, even when they happen to be in power, to take the steps that many of us believe are necessary to move toward more sustainability. And all of that is true, and all of that is disheartening. But I want to offer another perspective. I actually believe that public opinion, continued effort on the part of students, on the part of academic administrations, on the part of communities, on the part of public, educational efforts, laws, policies are slowly but inevitably moving in the right direction toward a sustainable future. And I'm optimistic that we're going to reach a sustainable future. I don't know when, and I don't know how much pain we and the rest of the planet are going to have to go through before we get there, but I actually think in the long run, it's inevitable. And all of the news isn't bad. Bad things that we used to do or we proposed doing a quarter of a century ago or half a century ago without thinking or without understanding about the adverse consequences of what we were proposing, we no longer do or we didn't do. And that's good news. And some of the things that we knew we ought to be doing 25 years ago, we're now beginning to do. We don't have 50 or 100 nuclear power plants up and down the coast of California. And 25 or 30 years ago, that was the expectation. We didn't develop for housing the Marin Headlands or Point Reyes or the hills above Berkeley. And 25 or 50 years ago, that was the expectation. We didn't build dams that flooded the Grand Canyon. We didn't build fleets of commercial supersonic transports, aircraft, for commercial use. We passed and implemented bans on DDT and ozone-depleting chemicals and acid rain-producing pollutants. We saved the whales, or most of them. We saved the redwoods, or some of them. Fundamental support for the environment among the general public is very high, and it's growing, not shrinking, and it gets better with every generation. We have to accept that we're in this for the long haul, that there's going to be a lot of bad news, there are going to be setbacks, but that inevitably we're going to be moving in the right direction. There's never a shortage of bad ideas. There's never a shortage of inappropriate development plans or vested interests that favor money over the environment. There will be defeats, including painful ones, but fighting for the planet's environment is the right thing to do, and it always will be. And I believe that a century from now, future generations looking back on the environmental movement of the 20th century and the 21st century are going to think about the environmental movement the way we now look back on the anti-slavery movement, or the suffragette movement, or the civil rights movement, or the gay rights movement, or other examples where over time, social mores and assumptions and values slowly but inevitably changed for the better. Now, that may be small consolation for those of us working in the trenches every day, but the truth is I take my consolation where I can find it. And the ongoing work of the students here and the administration in moving piece by piece towards sustainability is encouraging. So let me actually talk about water, which is what I was asked to talk about and which I love to talk about. Water has some unusual characteristics. It touches on every aspect of the human endeavor, from health to the environment to food production to the ways we use energy to economic development to international security and conflict and politics. Freshwater issues are global, but they're also very local. There are new tools and ideas and technologies and voices evolving to solve water problems. The world of water is undergoing fundamental changes in the way we think about water, and there are also, I would argue, unprecedented opportunities. Depending on whether you're an optimist or a pessimist, the opportunities and the risks are both enormous to local communities, to the environment, to the business sector, and to international politics. We're still faced with old water problems that we failed to solve in the 20th century, and that's a problem. That's bad news. And we're faced with new challenges in the 21st century that we're just beginning to understand and just beginning to address. We've made enormous progress in the water area, not just the environment area broadly, but in water. And so anyone who says that all of the news is bad is wrong. But we do have unresolved and unaddressed water challenges. And the old ways of thinking about water, the ways we thought about water in the 20th century, I would argue are not going to be necessarily appropriate or enough for dealing with water in the 21st century. We need some new thinking. So first, what do I mean by a water crisis when I say that there are unresolved water challenges? There are many pieces to the water crisis: human, environmental, economic, political, social, cultural. To me, the human dimensions of the water crisis are the worst. And maybe you've heard some of the numbers. There are 1 billion people worldwide today that don't have access to safe drinking water, and 2.5 billion people worldwide that don't have access to adequate sanitation, something that all of us in this room basically take for granted. It's rare that at any moment in our normal life, we're more than a few steps from safe drinking water and adequate sanitation. But that's not true for billions of people worldwide, and that leads to bad things. The failure to meet basic human needs for water, safe water and affordable water and adequate sanitation, leads to water-related diseases: cholera, dysentery, schistosomiasis, guinea worm, the whole set of things that people get when they don't have safe water or adequate sanitation. And 2 to 5 million deaths a year, mostly of children, mostly under the age of 5, from preventable water-related diseases. And that's inexcusable. That's not a technological problem, it's not a financial problem, it's a social failure. And there are hundreds of millions of people drinking water contaminated with natural and industrial pollutants. We know how to make dirty water clean, we know how to keep clean water clean, but we have failed to do so throughout the world, and that's one piece of this puzzle. There's a food dimension to the world's water challenge. Food production requires water, a lot of water. And while we've done remarkable things with food production worldwide, we face new challenges. The area of irrigated land is growing, but it's growing less slowly than population is growing. So the amount of irrigated land per person worldwide is actually shrinking. And as population grows, that means we have to grow more and more food per person on the land we already have. We have to become more efficient and more productive in our production of food. A lot of the water that we use to grow food comes from unsustainable sources of water, from groundwater that's not renewable, and that can't be sustained in the long run, and that's a challenge. And there are many other challenges associated with food production as well. The conflict between human uses of water and the environment are growing. For too long, humans have taken the water that we need for our industries and homes and agriculture from the ecosystems that also need that water. And as a result, those ecosystems, which also provide us with crucial environmental services that we don't fully appreciate or quantify or understand, are suffering the consequences of human use of water. The most threatened species and ecosystems on the planet are those that need the water that we humans also need for the things that we want to do. Fisheries, river deltas, inland wetlands, migratory routes are all threatened by the way we use water. Some rivers no longer reach the sea. The Colorado River, we completely consume, and no water reaches the mouth of the Colorado anymore. The Yellow River, the Nile, more and more of the major rivers of the world are completely or largely consumed by humans and no longer reach the sea. And in the most disturbing example of our ability to affect the planet's environment, we're altering our very climate. The evidence is clear and compelling that climate change not only will occur, but is already occurring. And the evidence is clear and compelling that the climate changes that we're seeing are largely caused by human activities and the emissions of greenhouse gases. And our delay in committing to efforts to address this problem at the national level and at the global level is committing us to more and more severe climate consequences. And among the most serious consequences of climate change will be impacts on our water resources. You all remember the hydrologic cycle from 5th grade. Evaporation, the formation of clouds, condensation, precipitation, runoff, back into the oceans, evaporation again. That's the hydrologic cycle. That's the climate cycle as well. And as we change the climate, we will affect water availability, the frequency and intensity of storms, snowfall and snowmelt in the Sierra Nevadas, water quality. Demand for water will be affected by higher temperatures. Water and climate are very closely connected, and we are not yet beginning to deal with those issues. And of course, there are political and social dimensions to the water crisis. Water is both a human right and an economic good. Water has vital social and cultural and political characteristics. And in September of 2010, after decades of negotiations and discussion and debate, the United Nations passed a binding resolution, finally, declaring a human right to water. And it was a huge success. But acknowledging that water is a human right comes up against the conflict that we also consider water to be an economic good. It's a resource that we extract and use for our economies to produce food and goods and services. It takes financial resources to build and maintain the water systems that provide the water for our big cities that long ago outgrew their local water resources, or the water and wastewater systems that collect and treat our wastewater so that we're not dumping contaminated water back into the environment, or the big irrigation systems that provide the food that feeds 6.5 and going to be 7 billion people this year. And many of the problems that we face in the world of water result from the conflict between water as a human right and water as an economic good. And the business of water is a big business. On average, around $500 billion a year is spent in the water sector, if you include drinking water treatment, disinfection, industrial pretreatment for high-quality water, wastewater collection and treatment, desalination, utility operations, infrastructure development and management, demand management and conservation. There are a lot of pieces to the water business, and it's a big business worldwide, and it's growing. Governments are encouraging new investment in the water sector. And in many parts of the world, we need massive new investment in the water sector. Balancing these conflicting ideas, water is an economic good and water is a human right, balancing these philosophies is a challenge. And one example of the challenge that we face in this is bottled water. The remarkable transformation over the last couple of decades of a public good into a private commercialized product. And so let me talk about bottled water a little bit, but think of bottled water as a symptom of a much bigger set of problems. It's symptomatic of a set of problems in the water world that we have. And it's a remarkable story, bottled water. I call it remarkable for a number of reasons that may be obvious to many of you in the room, but I think we're losing sight of how strange and remarkable the whole story of bottled water really is, in part because bottled water has become so ubiquitous in our society. So step back for a moment and think about a plastic bottle of water. Now, at this point, my intention was to hold up a plastic bottle of water, but I didn't bring one with me. And I spent 5 minutes wandering around looking at probably 20 garbage cans out there for a plastic bottle I could pull out and show to you, and I couldn't find one. So right off the bat, congratulations. But now you're just going to have to use your imagination and imagine I'm holding up a plastic bottle of water. So think about the bottle, first of all, and what it entails. Petroleum and all of the things required to gather and process petroleum. The technology to turn that petroleum, and it's a lot of petroleum, it turns out, into plastic. And then the technology to turn that plastic into a safe container. The industry and the concept, the idea, to then take that container and fill it with potable water, and to seal it and to label it and to package it and to ship it and to stock it and advertise it and sell it and consume it and throw it away. All of which is pretty remarkable when you actually think about it. And then the waste side of the whole story, the collection of garbage and the transportation to a landfill or to an incinerator or to a recycling plant, and then the whole process again. All of that is entailed in a single plastic bottle of water. It's a remarkable set of implications and businesses and energy use and industries. It's really sort of a strange story. So think then about the contents and what that entails. A little portion of safe, potable water. We hope potable. We're not always sure. A product that's available to all of us in our homes or a few feet away in a water fountain, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, at a cost in the bottle 2,000 to 3,000 times higher than what we pay for tap water. So that's kind of strange right there. So 2,000 to 3,000 times more you're paying for the water in this plastic bottle, plus you're paying for the plastic, you're paying for the bottle, you're paying for the industries that were developed to create the whole thing and get it to you, than from drinking tap water. And we're buying it by the billions of gallons. 9 billion gallons a year last year of bottled water were sold and consumed in the United States alone. 9 billion gallons, it's a lot of water. And it's a lot of money. It's a big business. So why do we drink and buy bottled water? How safe is our tap water? How safe is our bottled water? What are the consequences of the bottled water industry? And I'm going to end up with what perhaps we could be doing about it. Not just bottled water, but water in general. So why do we drink bottled water? And I say we in the broadest sense, not to imply anything of anybody in this audience. People are buying and drinking bottled water, I think for lots of reasons, but 4 main reasons. The first is we're increasingly fearful of our tap water. The second is sometimes we don't like the taste of our tap water, or we think we don't. The third is bottled water has been made incredibly convenient. It's harder and harder to find a water fountain that's clean and working, and easier to find bottled water. So where's the nearest water fountain? I'm not even sure, but I can tell you I can buy bottled water at the bottom of the stairs, right downstairs. Okay, so nearby, maybe around the corner. Tap water's closer. But in general, it's easy to find. Where I work in downtown Oakland, there are 2 water fountains within 50 yards of my office, neither of which work. But I can buy bottled water within 50 yards of my office. It's increasingly convenient to buy bottled water, and that's intentional. Fourth, so fear of the tap, taste, convenience. Fourth, marketing, advertising. We are increasingly convinced by very effective marketing and advertising that bottled water is going to make us healthier or sexier or more stylish, or I don't know. How many of you've all seen Jennifer Aniston's ads where she's wearing little or nothing? Okay, those ads are actually directed probably, in my opinion, more at women than at men. But the idea is you drink my bottled water, Jennifer Aniston's bottled water, and you too can look like Jennifer Aniston. Not me, but you maybe. So advertising and marketing. So let me address some of these in a little more detail. First of all, fear of the tap. We're worried about the quality and safety of our tap water. There are new contaminants with unknown health implications that aren't regulated by the Safe Drinking Water Act, the federal law that protects our tap water. We need better monitoring and enforcement of the existing laws. We need better public reporting of the quality of our tap water. And I would argue there are intentional efforts on the part of the bottled water industry to increase consumer fear of tap water. There have been very explicit campaigns, marketing campaigns, to make you fear your tap water. Now, we have a wonderful tap water system in this country, a wonderful tap water system. It's one of the things that made this country great. The tap water in this country is, for the most part, incredibly safe and incredibly cheap and incredibly reliable and available for everyone. It could be better. I'd be the first to acknowledge that our tap water system could be better. There are places where we legitimately don't like the taste of our tap water. It might be safe, but we don't like the taste. There are places where some of our tap water systems violate certain standards for some part of the year on occasion for certain kinds of contaminants. There are new unregulated contaminants. But the answer is not bottled water. The answer is to make our tap water system better. And that requires investment. It requires some of us to pay more for water than we're actually already paying. And I would argue most of us don't pay enough for water already. Water is incredibly cheap. Most of us, even those of us who pay a water bill, probably pay less every month than you're paying. We're paying for internet service and our cell phone and our landline if we have one and our cable TV separately. My water bill's less than each of those. So if we were to pay a little more and our water systems were upgraded with the best technology, we could remove unregulated contaminants, even if they're not regulated. And I'm not holding my breath waiting for Congress to add new regulations to our clean water system, even though they ought to. But we could upgrade our systems. That's something that we ought to be doing now. Let's make our great tap water system better. And that would address the taste issue as well. We can make water that tastes like anything. We can make salt water taste like anything. We can make contaminated water taste like anything. But the assumption that just because there are sometimes problems with our tap water system, which we hear about because the law requires that we're told right away, the assumption that bottled water is any safer is a wrong assumption to make. Bottled water is also regulated, but it's regulated differently. And I would argue not as strongly. And the details, I've written about the details, you can read about them if you want. But not all bottled water is regulated at all. Some of it's regulated less strongly to certain standards than tap water. Not all the contaminants that ought to be regulated are regulated. And the enforcement is often voluntary enforcement by the industry, not the model I would argue to encourage confidence in the quality of our bottled water. And the labels on bottled water tell us almost nothing about any of that. And that's a problem as well. And when we look at the quality of bottled water, do we find problems? Yes, we do. I ended up when I was doing the research for my book, filing Freedom of Information Act requests with the Food and Drug Administration to get information on bottled water recalls, which ought to be public information, and it's not on their website, and found hundreds of examples of bottled water contamination with mold and bacteria and glass particles and sanitizer and benzene and all sorts of things, including my favorite example, which was a bottled water recall in the mid-90s from a company in Texas that recalled bottled water because it turned out to be contaminated with crickets. I don't know where they came from. They weren't intentional. You know, you could buy vodka with a worm in it. If they'd been smart, maybe they could have marketed bottled water with crickets in it, but I think that wasn't their intention. So my bottom line on safety is our tap water and our bottled water are both remarkably safe, I believe. But they could both be safer, they could both be more effectively regulated, and the regulations that we already have could be enforced. And no one should be drinking bottled water because they assume it's better than their tap water. There are other hidden costs of bottled water. The huge plastic requirement, again, 9 billion gallons a year, almost all of it sold in little plastic bottles, on the order of 20 to 30 billion little plastic bottles a year in the US alone. Almost all of that is polyethylene terephthalate, the number one plastic. It's a great plastic, it's tasteless, doesn't impart chemicals into the water so far as we know. It's safe, it's transparent, it's unbreakable, it's light, it's cheap, it's recyclable. The industry tells us over and over again, it's 100% recyclable, and that's true. But I do want you to know there's an important difference between recyclable and recycled. And we don't recycle the plastic that we even try and collect. About 20%, 25%, maybe a little more of the plastic bottles in this country are recycled, and the rest end up in landfills or incinerators or by the side of the road or in our streams. Another cost of bottled water, local groundwater pumping. There have been more and more local examples where big bottled water plants have gone in and overpumped the local groundwater. In Michigan and Maine, there's been a risk of this in California. There's an environmental cost of taking water out of the environment, a public resource, and putting it in plastic bottles and selling it. In conclusion, our production and consumption of bottled water has very serious environmental, economic, and social costs. I think we have to tackle those costs directly, those problems directly, and tackle the reasons people buy bottled water. I've never argued for a complete ban on bottled water. It's a commodity. People probably ought to be allowed to buy it if they so choose. But I do think it's probably going to be more effective to tackle the reasons people buy bottled water and to reduce the demand in that way. So make sure our tap water is clean and safe and that people don't fear it and that it tastes good. Make sure that there are public water fountains everywhere. Make it easy to find public water and hard to find bottled water. So in general, for the environmental movement, make it easy to do the right thing and difficult to do the wrong thing, and we move in the right direction. Let's start educational campaigns about the challenges with bottled water. I've talked about expanding and improving tap water systems. I do think we need to develop and pass new, smarter regulations at the national level. And I'm not holding my breath, but the reality is that the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act, which we passed 40 years ago in this country, that have led to enormous improvements in the quality of water in the United States, need to be brought into the 21st century. They're out of date, and they need to be updated, and Congress has to do that. And it would help if the president pushed in that direction as well. We need to protect consumers from advertising fraud, and that requires the Federal Trade Commission and the Food and Drug Administration to do the right thing. There are regulations on the books to protect consumers against bad advertising, but they're not enforced. And they're not enforced because there's been an effort over the years to strip government of their ability to regulate and enforce public interest laws, and that's bad. We need truthful labeling on our bottles. California's taken a step in this direction. California bottled water labels are supposed to be a little bit better than they used to be. Those laws aren't enforced, but the laws on the books in California are better than the laws in many other states, and they ought to be national. There are local things that ought to be done, and the initiative that's been passed here on campus, I gather by an 8-to-1 margin, is a remarkable thing, and it's a step in the right direction to move away from bottled water. And the initiative to cut campus water use by 10% is a step in the right direction. I think it could be 20%, but I'll take 10% if you actually meet it quickly enough. All of those efforts at the local level are really important. At the individual level, stop buying bottled water. Start carrying around refillable bottles. And make sure on campus there are water fountains that can be used to refill those bottled water, those refillable bottles. And that's an incentive as well. There's another project, and let me throw this one out because I'm looking for some help here. The Pacific Institute that I direct, which is in Oakland now, we're doing a project developing an app for Android phones at the moment. It's a project we're doing with Google. It's an open source project to map and, basically to map public drinking water fountains. So this app is going to do two things, and we're going to have a beta version probably this week or next week for testing. You can walk up to a water fountain with your Android phone. Its GPS system records where you are. You open the app, you can take a photo of the water fountain. You can fill out a little questionnaire. Is the water fountain working? Is it not working? Is the water chilled or not filled? Can you use it to fill a water bottle or not? And you upload it to a general public database. Or you can open this app and you can click on the map and it will show you the nearest water fountains. So what we're looking for is 10 or 20 students or residents of Berkeley who have Android phones and Gmail accounts and Picasa accounts for the photos, to take this test version of the app and to start playing with it and to start intensively mapping in the East Bay outdoor water fountains. So I'll have a sign-up sheet afterwards. If you're interested in doing this, it's a way that we can start putting these water fountains on the map. We can get feedback about what works and doesn't work on this app. And then Google is committed to redoing new versions, and then we're going to launch it for the rest of the world. I think it could be a great little project. So if you're interested, come see me. Restaurants in the Bay Area are moving away from bottled water. You know, the truth is restaurants make a lot of money with bottled water. If they can get you to buy bottled water rather than serve you free tap water. But Bay Area restaurants and restaurants in the rest of the country are slowly, some of them, are slowly beginning to move away from that. And Chez Panisse and Poggio in San Francisco have led the way in this, in offering free tap water and banning bottled water. Cities are cutting purchases of bottled water. There's been some counter-advertising. New York and Paris have launched very effective advertising campaigns to support their tap water. There is a movement against bottled water, and it's having an effect, and I think it needs to be encouraged. We have to manage water for the 21st century, not the 20th century, and that means our institutions have to change. Our universities are going to have to do more than teach old-style hydrology and water, but think about sustainability and smart water economics. They're going to have to reach out to more than just men and engineers. We're going to have to think at the utility level, water planning and management. It turns out some of the cheapest way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions are not energy efficiency programs, but water efficiency programs that save hot water. We're going to have to look at collaborations between farmers and cities and the environmental community, between industry and environmentalists. We have to look at innovative ways to streamline regulations so that ineffective regulations are thrown out, but that we don't throw out regulations that are critical. The idea that all regulations are bad is wrong, and we have to fight against that. But we also have to understand that smart economics, educational activities, new technologies also play an important role in moving towards sustainability. We can move to a sustainable future for water. We will, I think, but it's going to take serious efforts, a willingness to work through failures and defeats, and to work over multiple generations. Water is precious, it's scarce, it's valuable, it's vital. Our use of it has to be thoughtful, sustainable, and carefully planned. Welcome to your future. Thank you.